I'd like to introduce this topic about a gap in Catholic theology with parts of two songs. And I'm going to ask you to tell me what's the difference between what these two guys are expressing in these two songs. They're both from the 50s. You ready? Mm-hmm. The Big Bopper. Chantilly lace and a pretty face and a ponytail hanging down. A wiggle in the walk and a giggle in the talk. Makes the world go round, round, round. Ain't nothing in the world like a big-eyed girl to make me feel so funny, make me spend my money, make me feel real loose like a long-necked goose or like a girl. Oh, baby, that's what I like. Any of you remember that song?
Yeah.
Two people, maybe. Maybe 10 years younger than me. The other one is also from the 50s, Broadway play. I have often walked down this street before, but the pavement always stayed beneath my feet before. All at once am I several stories high, knowing I'm on the street where you live. Oh, the towering feeling, just to know somehow you are near. The overpowering feeling that any moment you may suddenly appear. What's the difference?
Lust versus love.
That would be simply put. At least the first person is in a, I don't know if we can call it lust, but he's in love with love. He's finding out that the most beautiful thing, as it says in the movie Venus, I'll mention later, the most beautiful thing a man is ever going to see is the body of a woman. He's finding that out. He loves women. The other guy has had something happen to him that connects him to one woman. One unique woman, not any woman. One unique woman. C.S. Lewis says, without whom you will not be happy. This experience that is almost universal in all of humanity, I believe probably in every culture, people fall in love. We get compelled several times in a lifetime, sometimes many times, some people not at all, perhaps because of their woundedness, because of someone else's lust, somewhere along the line. But it's almost universal that it grabs us. We don't even predict it. Sometimes we don't want it, but there it is. We're just so compelled by one person that it changes everything. Pulls us into a whole different way of living. So one could say, with a sort of practical view of spirituality, that falling in love is immensely spiritual because of the effect it has on the human spirit. Not just during the falling in love part, but after that, when it becomes a project. To make it work, which we'll talk about. There's a theme. This illustrates the point even better, I think, in a way. Anybody has not seen any of those? There's some of those you've seen, right?
Yeah.
Just about everybody. What's the theme that's common there? The theme, I'll just say it. Sex, sex, sex. Abundant sex. Prostituting sex, seductive sex, sex that becomes tedious even in a graduate. And then something happens. Out of the midst of all of that self-absorbed sort of behavior, all of a sudden these two people fall in love. Even in that mess, all of a sudden, in this one you may not have seen, but I think the one says to the other, they're arguing. Because he's been coming to her for sex as a prostitute, and all of a sudden they're having this argument because they can't, neither one of them can really face intimacy. And he, I think it's he that says to her, "You felt it too." They both felt it. Felt this is different. It's totally different. So what you have in Catholic and Christian theology is a protection from the painfulness of lust, on the one hand, with all kinds of regulation and moral thinking, and an ignoring of the spiritual value of this, which many of us could easily believe is the Spirit of the living God, accosting our life, pulling us into a direction that may even mature us. Maybe it's intended for us another chance to grow up. There are three aspects. We might have a theologian or two in here who would argue with this, but you know, so what? Any religious tradition has three kinds of writings. There is descriptive, how things are, and there is prescriptive, how things should be, what's beautiful in spiritual theology, and then there is proscriptive, what should not be. All religions have that kind of writing, in some way or other. In Christianity, and especially Catholicism, there's this moral theology, and that is where we deal with sexuality. We deal with it from a moral point of view rather than a spiritual point of view. We need to fill that gap. And one of the reasons is women. Women have, we'll get to this a little more specifically later on. Women have started talking in the 60s. And all of that theology was developed for like 900 years by celibate theologians who had never been in bed with a woman, or at least that they could admit openly. So they developed all of that without cognizance of womanhood. And indeed, one can, as you'll see, I think one cannot blame them in a way. Women didn't know. Women were not dissected. What is it at the end of life? What is it?
Autopsy.
Autopsy. They didn't do autopsies on women for, I think, till 19th century. Women were not examined with their clothes off. Nobody knew. Can you get that in your mind? The women didn't know. They didn't know much about themselves. And then, at least in the 60s, when one of the things that I was aware of as a theological person was that a few women started going to theology school. And they had this experience like, I don't belong here. There's some crazy stuff here. No, it's not crazy. Something's wrong with me. Then they would have coffee with another woman. Pretty soon there'd be two of them, three of them having coffee, and they would discover something's wrong with this place. Because their whole way of being, what they were into, had all been created by men that had no cognizance of women's perspective.